And this time, it's my great honor to turn things over to our
Thank you.
Dr. David Patterson.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is the book, 18 Words to Sustain a Life. In the lower right-hand corner of the cover is the Hebrew word chai, the word for life, which has a value, numerical value of 18, hence the 18 words. And I like to point out that the photograph of me holding my grandbaby, Julia, is what the book's about. This is not my usual photo for a book cover, but that's what this book is about. And the book is about, among other things, memory. The first word I want to share some reflections from the book itself. One of my teachers, someone whom I regard as a teacher, Elie Wiesel, once said that memory is a passion no less powerful or pervasive than love. What does it mean to remember, he asks. It is to live in more than one world, to prevent the past from fading and to call upon the future to illuminate it. It is to revive fragments of existence, to rescue lost beings, to cast hard light on faces and events, to drive back the sands that cover the surface of things, to combat oblivion and reject death. Memory, is a passion, something that burns and yet does not consume. A soul on fire is a soul aflame with memory. No less powerful than love, memory is steeped in love. It is memory of what we love, whom we love, why we love. Those of us who grew up in a synagogue on Yom Kippur as youngsters remember the Yizkor service, which is a prayer of remembrance for those who have passed. It's we remember, we remember, we remember. And some of us can still remember, again, when we were very young, we didn't have parents to honor, to remember in the Yizkor service. And we would go back in the shul after Yizkor, people would be crying. Memory is a passion, no less than love. Memory is made of love. The wings by which the soul takes flight are wings of memory. Memory is not just of the past, but is for the sake of the future. The future is not the opposite of the past. The absence of future is the opposite of the past. Without the past, we have no future. Without memory, we have no future. We have no place, no sense of place in time. Now, we measure time in our tradition, not from the first day of creation, but from the sixth day. Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the creation of the human being, the creation of memory. It's known as Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance. It's a day when we pray to remember and remember to pray. We plead with God that he too might remember. Just as he heard the moaning of the Israelites in Egypt and remembered his covenant, God too is faced with the task of memory. We implore God to remember so that he might make us remember. Without God, we have no memory. Without God, we have no memory. We have only contrived fabrications that the postmodernists call narratives, which are empty and meaningless and devised for the promotion of a power struggle. Memory is not about power. Memory is about sanctity. Memory is about holiness. Memory is about relationship. between God and humanity, human and human. The prophet Joel tells us that, that God insists that we remember the covenant, or else, says Joel, the sun will lose its shining and we will forget our names. It's only when we remember the name of the one we call Hashem that we can have any memory of who we are and how to answer when we are called. So we beg God to remember his covenant, and God begs us to remember the covenant. Covenant relationship is made of memory. It's not just memory is between two. Memory is between God and humanity. One of the most famous instances in the Torah where we're commanded to remember is in the Ten Commandments. The first time the commandments are given in chapter 20 of Exodus. The second time they're given in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy. They're two sets, you might say, of 10 commandments. And in the book of Exodus, we're summoned to remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy. Memory is tied to keeping something holy. It's zachor. Zachor. Remember. In the book of Deuteronomy, however, we have the word shamor. Shamor, which is badly translated as observe. Shamor is not observe. Shamor is to watch over carefully, watch over something precious and fragile that's been placed in your hands and entrusted to your care. There's nothing more fragile than the Shabbat, the Sabbath bride. Shabbat is one of the names of God. Shabbat is not a day of the week. It's what imparts meaning to every other day of the week. One of our sages, the Maharal of Prague, compares the sixth day of creation to the six directions of space: up, down, left, right, front, back. The seventh is what sanctifies and imparts meaning to the rest. The Sabbath in Jewish tradition is the only day that has a name. The other days are Yom Rishon, Yom Shini, the first day, second day, third day from the Sabbath. The seven branches of the menorah have at the center the light, the lamp that signifies the Sabbath. And we have a teaching that says when the menorah burned, the three lamps on each side had their flames were inclined toward the center, toward the Sabbath. This is what we are to remember and watch over. Memory is about watching over something that is infinitely dear, infinitely precious, and infinitely fragile. Therefore, when you can imagine the rabbis ask about this, right? Why two words? They ask about everything. And there's a saying in the Talmud that says, Zachor v'shamor b'dibur echad. Remember and watch over, guard carefully, were given in a single word. God can speak two words in one word, the sages tell us. Both words pertain to the Shabbat, without which we have no memory. Without the Shabbat, we have no memory. Shabbat is about remembrance, just as Rosh Hashanah, Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance, is about remembrance. The most frequently repeated word in the Yom Kippur liturgy, other than Hashem, is remember. Memory, remember. Memory is at the core of our humanity, the core of our human relationship. We all know this, right? You know that. We all know how frustrating it is when you can't remember a name. It's embarrassing. Why so embarrassing? Because the memory of someone's name is the memory of someone's soul, a memory of the relationship. So that, you're thankful when you are reminded of someone's name, right? So those are a few thoughts about the word memory.
Thank you, Dr. Patterson. They were beautiful thoughts and very, very deep and profound thoughts. And indeed, if you think of memory, if you think of meaning, actually, and look at that word for just a moment, in our perceptions, our memories, the things that we can remember are intricately connected with our sense of meaning. Think of how shocked you might feel one day if someday you forgot your birthday, what your actual date of birth would be in a discussion or in some moment of confusion. Think of how traumatic that could be, because that's tied with the meaning. We were brought into the world for the purpose of sharing these discussions and our memories and our recognition of each other's souls. And so how profound I think it was at one point in this chapter when you talked about the word immemorial. And I never had really thought about that word very much. But I think, as you pointed out, comes from the early 17th century medieval Latin, and the prefix im, meaning not, and memoralis, relating to the memory. So it may not be in our current memory, something that's immemorial, because it preceded even our birth, the time of our birth. But collectively, this is something nonetheless that we can embrace, originating in the distant past, very, very old, such as an immemorial custom, but something that has such meaning because it's rooted in such great tradition. And so I think at one point you suggested that we pray to God to help us remember that which we can no longer remember. Those distant memories that our soul knows, that perhaps our conscious mind has perhaps forgotten. And these are the eternal truths of God's love, to quote from your chapter here, the eternal truths of God's love and light that imbues our souls from our creation, and perhaps even, as you so often suggest, from before our actual creation. Because as we're going to come to discuss soul later on, that goes, it's not limited by our temporal space and understanding. And yet these memories connect us with all souls, and in turn then with God. And so when you have dedicated so much of your life to the study of the Holocaust happening in recent historical memory, it's because that is such a central connection to those who did give their lives up for a sacred cause, and for whom it's our obligation to hold dearly in our heart and in our memories. And not only in our own memories, but for historical memory, because it's a disgrace each and every time there is someone who comes along and diminishes the extent of those human losses and tragedies. It doesn't mean to say that there are not other human losses and tragedies. Unfortunately, there have been many since the time of the Holocaust. But that doesn't mean that any of them is less unique or less special. And they're all connected together with memory. And to the extent that we can document and show how our memories may at times have objective reality, that they can be recorded, that they can be verified, that itself is an honor and a testimony to those who have preceded us. So that's sort of what.
Well, yeah, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned the Holocaust, and we have, a Holocaust Remembrance Day, Remembrance Week. One of the defining features of the Holocaust, as stated by Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi, independently of each other, is that the Holocaust was a war against memory. Professor Wiesel and Primo Levi are two very different kinds of witnesses, survivors, but they both saw this defining feature of the Shoah as a war against memory. There's a scene in Schindler's List when Amon Goeth, the SS guy, is about to have his guys liquidate the Krakow ghetto, and he says to the SS men, the Jews have been in Krakow for 800 years. By the end of the afternoon, those 800 years will be a rumor. They didn't happen. So it's the war against memory is a war against what? A testimony. It's a war against God's witnesses who in their remembrance bear witness to the Holy One, to the covenant. As God says in one of the ancient texts, when you are my witnesses, I am God. If you destroy the memory of his witnesses, you destroy God himself. God himself lives in our memory, lives in our memory. The God who utters our name to create our soul. If I shall I go to soul.
Well, I'll tell you what,
One
just
more
before
thing?
I'd like to comment something on something
Sure.
that you talked about here that's very, very relevant to
Sure.
that. And that was something that I had really not been aware of, Dr. Patterson, to the extent that you elucidated it here. And that is that part of the perversity of what the Nazis tried to do, as they obliterated people and they took their lives, then they went back to, he spoke a few minutes ago about what we do on News Corps, right? To remember those who are no longer with us, the memory in that we have a special service dedicated to that, in which we invoke the memories and the blessings of those who came before us. Well, where are the physical bodies of the evidence, the objective evidence of our dear ones found? They are buried in cemeteries. And so perversely, the Nazis, in addition, after they had killed people and then liquidated ghettos, then they went after the cemeteries and dug up bodies and then defaced the gravestones so as to make it appear that even the memories that were written in stone no longer were part of the surface of the earth. And
Yes.
that was the ultimate, I think, in perversity.
Yes, and the custom of placing a stone on a gravestone, a matzeva, as it's called, is to sustain memory, to keep the stone from wearing away. That's about memory also. And the immemorial, I should say one thing, immemorial is what precedes all memory. It belongs to the Torah that we are imbued with before God sends our soul into this world. That's the immemorial. It's the meaning that precedes everything else, the holiness that precedes everything else. It's the Torah that the soul is made of. Shall I?
Yes.
We can go to souls.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, in the Jewish tradition, we're taught that every letter of the Torah corresponds to a soul. Each of us has a soul, and each of our souls corresponds to one of the letters. The Torah is spoken by God. When God speaks and brings heaven and earth into being to say, let there be light, prior to the creation of the luminaries of the heavens, he's speaking Torah. The or, Vayehi or, let there be or, is what we call or Torah, the light of Torah. So, and we're also taught that on that day or first day, with that utterance, the soul of each person was created with that utterance, and in the utterance of the name of each soul. So the soul is not an object or an entity, even it's a speech act of God. It is what I like to call God's prayer to and for a creation. When God utters the name of the soul, God himself is saying a kind of prayer for the sake of his creation, because he creates each soul for the sake of his creation. Every soul that enters this realm is, as I've often said, indispensable to all of creation. So what we make of our souls, lies in to what extent we're able to attach our own words and deeds to God's words and deeds through the performance of the commandments, what we call the mitzvot. The soul is made of fire. There's a very powerful poem, I think I quoted in the book, by Solomon Ibn Gabriel.
Yes.
About the soul is made of fire.
I believe that's it.
That's it, yes.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I should just read a few of these lines.
Like to, sure.
It says, thou hast imparted to it, the soul, a spirit of wisdom and called it soul. And of flames and intellectual fire hast thou wrought its form. And like a burning fire, thou hast wafted it and sent it to the body to serve and guard it. It is as fire in the midst thereof, yet doth not consume it. For it is from the fire of the soul that the body has been created, and goeth from nothingness to being, because the Lord descended on him in fire. Solomon Ibn Gabriel, medieval poet, very powerful poet from Spanish, from Spain, from the golden age of Spain, the Jewish golden age of Spain. So the body doesn't have a soul. The soul has a body. The soul is manifests as body, but the soul transcends the body. The body is like one of these lights. Inside the light, there's an intense fire, and emanating all around the light, there's a surrounding light. We call it the or pnimi, the inner light of the soul, and the or makif, the surrounding light of the soul. The soul is bigger than the body. Souls overlap. I was once walking home from synagogue some years ago with a friend of mine, and he had a 5-year-old little boy who asked, where's my soul? 5 years old. And his father said, well, where do you think it is? And he paused and said, I think it's everywhere. And I looked at my friend and said, yeah, he knows it's everywhere. Over time, over space. There, maybe one of these times we'll do a series on the 5 levels of the soul. But the upper levels, the 2 upper levels of the soul called Yechida and Chaya are beyond space-time, are at Mount Sinai. There's part of the soul that is contemporary with the time of every holy day, every Chag. Part of what makes a holy day holy is the transcendence of time by entering into the eternal that is within the soul. The book of Proverbs describes the soul as the candle of God. Ner Hashem, the candle of God. How does God bring light to his creation? He brings light through the creation of the soul and through the love that the soul brings to God's creation. If God creates out of love for humanity, creation is sustained by a human being's love for another human being and for God. That's how we express our love for God. Love for the other human being is the meaning of our life, from which the soul draws its breath. And I use, breath and soul as a play on words in Hebrew. Breath is neshima, soul is neshama. The word for soul comes from the word for breath. And just one more thing I want to stress here is that according to Jewish understanding, in contrast to Hellenistic understanding from the Greeks, the soul, as I said, the soul and the body are not enemies. They're not opposites. The body is part of the soul, as I suggested. Nefesh is the word in Hebrew. Nefesh is the physical aspect of the soul. There's an ancient tension between Greek thinking and Hebraic thinking. from the time of the Maccabees, right? We all know the story of Hanukkah. What is it about? It's about a collision, not of powers, but a collision between ways of understanding God, world, and humanity. According to the Greek tradition, the body is the enemy of the soul. We have this in some traditions. We're taught that that when we die, the soul goes to a better place. This isn't Jewish. This is a better place. This is a better place. This is why we have the teaching of concerning resurrection. The soul is not complete until the body is rejoined with the soul as part of the soul. That's what the teaching of concerning resurrection is about. It's not so that we get to live again, exactly, but so that we can be complete. So that we can be complete. So that we can do mitzvahs. So we can offer one another an embrace. An embrace. You all know this. We all know this. We all know in the embrace of our beloved mother, father, child, husband, wife, grandchild, like on the back of this book, you know what gives strength and life to your soul. I used to tell my children when they were very small, give me a hug. It makes me strong and happy. And I wasn't kidding. So once in a while, this is so beautiful. When one of my I have two girls, they would see me because sometimes I have this furrowed brow because I'm thinking about some problem. Daddy, do you need a hug? I'll make you strong and happy. I'll make you strong and happy. But this everyday expression of love through an embrace tells us what the soul is about, where the soul lives, why it lives, what it is. A few thoughts on the soul.
Beautiful, beautiful. So for our readers who may have the book at home, I would like to start by making a little bit of a comment here on page 127, because I think there's some very, very profound thoughts that are shared in this section. On page 127 there, you talk about the fact that the soul is just the opposite of the self. And usually in Western thinking, we become preoccupied with our own egos and our own sense of self and our own sense of importance within the competitive nature of life such as it is. However, on the deeper spiritual level, you point out that indeed the obliteration of the self is the one doorway to truth. And then you say, and the truth that instills the soul with life enters the soul when the soul enters into a relation with another. The soul is the other within me. And indeed, this notion of all souls, and you say it specifically in another sentence here, a couple pages on, you say on page 128, each soul permeates all of creation, and all of creation pervades every soul. And so very much so, one of the writers that I was just very inspired with in my senior year in high school was, or even junior year, when I started reading Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he spoke about the oversoul and the concept of transcendentalism. And I think Emerson would like this in a way, because this notion of the souls being connected is that sense of our own individuality, obliterating the individuality per se, and connecting to larger truths beyond us. The Buddhists would also like that as well. For example, you note that the term bitul hayesh, the obliteration of the self, is the one doorway to truth here. And I think that's very much consonant with, to an aspect or parallel, to some of Buddhist thinking as well. I think they would be happy with that. I was wondering if you could just maybe respond to that
Yeah,
singular point.
that's an excellent point. There is, yes, part of the Buddhist mystical tradition entails an obliteration of the self and a union emerging into what the great nothing, so to say. And Buddhism is not atheistic; it's non-theistic. And in some of the Hindu mystical traditions, it's emergence and a merging with Brahman, the self with a capital S. So there's no relationship. I think in the Jewish tradition, the self is what gets in the way of the relationship. Most of us know this to be true, that when we have a problem in our relationships, it's because the ego is getting in the way. Maybe I'm just making my own confession here.
I think that's very true.
But and Abraham Joshua Heschel says the self is a self-delusion. It's about me, 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 and it blinds us to the face of another and deafens us to the cry that shouts out to us, "Where are you?" So it's the getting rid of the self in Jewish tradition is for the sake of a true relationship. It's for the sake of a between space, which is a little different from the Eastern
Exactly.
traditions.
If
It's a
I can
little
sort of
different. Yeah.
exactly, if I can sort of a dialogue on that for a moment. So when you said that, for example, the ideal in the Buddhist tradition is for the individual self to be obliterated and then, or at least cast down into, shrunk or melded into the great nothing. And the thought that came to my mind at that moment was that there lies a contradiction within for our own tradition. We would say that the individual, the obliteration of the single self, is not for a merge into the great nothing, but into the merge into the great everything. And
Okay.
that is why, if you look for our readers again, if you'll just jump into this one sentence that connects that, I think, perfectly on page 130, second paragraph, next to the last sentence. And it says, very profoundly, the soul is a flow or emanation of holiness from on high into this physical realm. So where those other traditions may be, like you said, non-theistic, ours is definitely theistic. And therefore we view the melding of that soul as an enrichment of the soul to its ultimate source. I think I should stop right there. Ultimate source, period.
Yeah, the source remains the source. The source remains the source. I could say more, but that's probably.
Yes, and that has inherent, for us, that has inherent holiness. And that's what
Yes.
you talked about, is the sacredness of each of our souls being imbued with the holy. It's not that we have to become holy. We don't think about this, but God has endowed us with our soul and our spirit that is inherently holy and timeless within itself. And I think to bring it to very much to our current geopolitical situation, and we've come across this theme before, if more people would recognize this, if again the radical terrorists who went in to the kibbutzim and shot someone else in the face who was reciting the Quran to him and shot him just because he had an Israeli star, if they would be aware, if they could be capable of being aware of remembering how we are indeed connected with other souls, it might help maybe to obliterate that unnecessary part of the ego and self and egocentric or even national centric view that gets in the way of connecting us with greater humanity.
Yes, the soul suffocates in the isolation of the ego. And because the soul draws its breath from the midst of a relation, the soul suffers what it inflicts and is healed by the healing that it offers. where each movement of every soul has an impact on every other soul. That's what I mean. Life is about that relation. When God breathes a soul into the dust to create a human being, it's the soul of life. That's what life is. Life is God's breath. Life is God's breath. So we talk about life.
Absolutely, please. A perfect segue.
Here, among the other things in this book, I recall a teaching from another person whom I count among my teachers, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who once said the following. He said, "When we say he is our life, the intention here is not that he is the giver of life, but he himself is our life. When I search for the I in the body," says Rabbi Steinsaltz, "I find the I of the soul. When I search for the I of the soul, I find the I of the divine, the one who alone can say I, Anochi. The first word at Mount Sinai, Anochi, I." Abraham Joshua Heschel says that life is a transcendental loan. He says, I have neither initiated nor conceived its worth and meaning. The meaning of life, whether or not life matters, precedes my life. So I'm already accountable. We enter this realm already accountable before the immemorial, before what precedes us. God is our life because God, when he breathes into us, the living soul, the living spirit, he breathes into us his own life. When God creates the creatures of the world, the plants, the stones, the heavens and the earth, it's through Vayechi. He said, let there be, let there be. And there are, fish in the sea, fowls in the air. Every creeping thing comes into being. But when he creates a human being, he puts himself into it. He blows into the dust. He breathes into the dust. He doesn't just say, come alive. Okay? He pours himself into it. And that what he pours into us is precisely life. Human life. There's no distinction between God and life. Where there is no life, if one can say such things, there's no God. When God commands us to choose life, I put before you this day life and death, good and evil, therefore choose life. He's commanding us to choose him, the one who has already chosen us. The living God is a lived God. As Professor Wiesel once said, God doesn't want to be studied between four walls. God wants to be lived. When you are my witnesses, I am God. How are we God's witnesses? Not through lip service, but with our hands. Sometimes with our silence. Life, the word life, Chaim is plural. Chaim is plural. I think it's perhaps plural because we have no life apart from a bond with other lives. Where there is life, there's life between two. When we do good, we do life. We make life. We create life. There's, and I have in mind a Hebrew expression called asa chaim.
Right.
Interesting expression. Make life, do life. What does it mean? It translates as rejoice in life. Where there is life, there is joy and thanksgiving. In the Psalm 100, sing a joyful noise unto the Lord. Come to him with thanksgiving. Life lies in giving. To be alive is to give, beginning with giving thanks, beginning with rejoicing. And it's joy often in spite of having a reason, whether we have a reason to rejoice or not. Even when we are in need, even when we are poverty-stricken, we have something to give, a smile, a touch, a song. And as one of the Hasidic masters says, if you don't know the words to the song, then chant a nigun, a melody with no words, I'm reminded of a close friend of mine who grew up on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, was a Buddhist.
Mm-hmm.
He was part of the civil rights movement, got beat up in Mississippi jails. In fact, he was, when I once went to Mississippi with him, and he started trembling. And he converted to Judaism, and he blamed me because I talked him into studying Pirkei Avot with me. So he converted to Judaism, and he told me when he was growing up on the reservation, they're very poor. I mean, literally a dirt floor in their house, if you could call it that. There's no plumbing, right? Mm-hmm. There's no electricity. And he said, we didn't know we were poor because we had no social worker to tell us that we were poor. Even under such circumstances, he has happy memories of his childhood. He has gratitude. And he was one of the most grateful people I ever knew. Zikaron Livracha, he's passed on. But he was thankful, and he was a Jew, a Yehudi, which is one who is thankful. Which brings me to one last thought about this word life, and the summons to choose life. Choose life. It's to choose goodness. I place before you this day good and evil, life and death. To choose life is to choose goodness. To be alive is to be good. To be good. And in the phrase, it tells us to choose life is in the Hebrews, uvaharta b'chaim. Uvaharta b'chaim, which is you shall choose. The ba can mean by means of. Choose by means of life. Live a life of choosing. Live a life of decision and decisiveness in the light of having been summoned by goodness. It's the good that has already chosen us that makes our decisions matter. It matters whether we choose life or death, good or evil. It matters because we're already assigned. This is the immemorial. It's the assignment, the chosenness before we make any choices, any decisions. So life arises in this choosing of life, through life, choosing a life that consists of the assertion, Hineni, here I am for you. Life happens where one person says, here I am for you to another. That's life. That's giving. That's rejoicing. That's gratitude. That's gratitude. In a realm where there is no here I am for you, where everyone is ferociously alone, as Primo Levi described Auschwitz, where there are, as Elie Wiesel said, here there were no fathers, no sons, no brothers. There's no life. There's no life there. It's as if there were no God. I say as if. So I'll stop there with my thoughts about life.
Well, very profound. Thank you so much. And for our listeners, I'm going to suggest these next 5 minutes are going to be quite interesting because as I was reading and studying this chapter again, there is one question or the one observation, it's both question and observation, that I want to sort of perhaps highlight and then ask for your insight on it. This may cover in the next, I'm building it up for our listening audience, but this may cover in the next 5 to 7 minutes, maximum probably, like 10 years of study or 2 years of study on modern philosophy. Where am I, how am I driving this? So I remember being very struck by learning. I was very privileged in high school to have a course on great thoughts, great thinkers. We studied Western civilization from its inception through the Greeks, then going through the modern period of existentialism and things. And one of the most interesting things that I grasped at that time was, if you ask and respond, well, what is the modern existential approach? Well, it was really taking the Greek approach and turning it on its head. So let me, for the sake of our, to sort of fill in a few gaps here for our listeners, let me explicate that just a bit, and then we'll come to the observation here. Because it's a unique one. I think the observation is something that didn't strike me in the same way until I studied this chapter. So in the Greek system, very simply, you have the concept of essence before the existence, that essence precedes existence. What do we mean by that? From the Greek point of view, if you looked at a table, we've got this table here, it's been set up very nicely for us, and if it's a physical table, but to the Greeks, if you go to the Platonic dialogues, this table is an illusion, because in 20,000 years, 100,000 years, a million years, it doesn't matter. It's going to be disintegrated. But what will not disintegrate is the idea of the table, the essence of the table. And that was exemplified by the famous part in the Platonic dialogues there, where you have the image of the man in the cave, right? And he's walking along this cave. And there's this little room in the back, and it's sort of a curvy cave. So there's this little room in the back, and that has a table, and there's a candle there. And the man's walking along from a different direction, and he sees the reflection, the light. He sees the reflection of the table on the wall in front of him. And he realizes that this is the essence of table, because it's not the actual table that he is feeling, but the image of the table on the wall gives him the idea of the table. And that, to the ancient Greeks, was the ultimate reality. Skip ahead 2,000 years, and the modern existentialism turns it on its head and said, essence, schmessence, it's hard to determine what that is. We're here, we're faced with infinite meaninglessness. How do we make sense of this world ahead of us? And of course, you say on page 139, here you can see why the meaninglessness, glorified by nihilism in all of its mutations, represents choosing death and evil and ultimately murder. You remember Sartre, Sartre wrote, did he not, The Stranger, right? Or was that Camus? Camus, yes. They were in the same school, basically. And Camus, they were trying to figure out, well, how do I find meaning in my life? Instead of having the essence, the existentialist said we have to create our essence, endow our lives with meaning. To find the essence, all we start with are the bare conditions of our existence. So for the existentialist, the existence precedes then the essence, as opposed to Greek, where the essence precedes the existence. And so in Camus' book, there was this nihilism, this sense of meaninglessness, because it wasn't connected to any ideals of ultimate purpose or meaning. So for Camus, what was the highlight in the book? He just does what the people did in New York recently. Punch people in the face, young woman walking along, punch them in the face, throw people in the way of subway. Doesn't matter. Whatever suits the person's whim at that moment. And in some perverse way, they say, in contradistinction to je pense donc je suis, Pascal, right? Pascal, was it not?
Descartes.
Descartes, excuse me, René Descartes. Je pense donc je suis, the French mathematician. I think, therefore I am. This latest perversion is I do, however perversely I feel like it at the moment, and that makes me something, because I've I've taken a life and there've been no consequences and nothing and nothing can harm me. So now that's the setting, and the observation then comes in this way. I think, and I would love your reaction to this, I think Judaism gives us the best of both worlds. Because as you say over and over throughout this chapter, and in every chapter throughout the book, everything is connected, and our souls and our lives are connected to God and to ultimate meaning and to ultimate source and to then ultimate value. And therefore, we, as you say, life has already chosen us. That's already been a fact, a fait accompli. And so therefore, our response is simply to say, we are here. Hineni, I'm ready to go and use what we can in our life through the medium of our life to respond to that calling. And then that response is itself that dialogue, which is inherently endowed from meaning from the beginning and through our choices enhanced in meaning.
Okay. Very good.
Does it make sense?
Yes. Best of both worlds. I would say Judaism gives us a third world, a third option through the teaching concerning creation, which is Bereshit. The first thing, most important thing is bara, created. And of course, bara also is related to the word brit, covenant. Covenant, creation, covenant between creator and the created. The Greeks have no notion of creation, causation, maybe, but not creation, not covenant with creator. And of course, the existentialists have, no idea of creator. There's no creator. We're the creator.
Yes.
Right. So I can see elements of both here, and here's where you might see a point of contact. It's not that we already have an essence. We already have a mission, an assignment already, in a kind of parallel way to things already have an essence. In a kind of parallel way to the existentialists who make everything of decisiveness, resolve, right? It's because we have been chosen for a destiny, for a mission, for an assignment, that we have to summon the resolve to pursue it, because it's often very dangerous to pursue, as we see in history. So yeah, there are parallels, but I would say that the Judaism is a third way, a third option, and not just taking some from each.
Yes, because those other traditions didn't have that sense of godliness, of holiness that pervades all the levels of the soul.
And covenant, yeah.
Yes.
Covenant is essential.
Covenant and our moral responsibility to be part of that and to respond to it.
Yeah.
And have that be part of our living interaction with God, our living essence, and our bond between other human beings as we see them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do we
Let's take some questions.
do we have any time
Richard,
for
do
questions?
we ask you to maybe be the collector for us? I'm reminded of grade school. There used to be a designated paper collector they would hand to the teachers. So this is great. And then we might also have some questions coming from online. And while we're waiting for the papers, Dr. Patterson, at least one of our students here, Juliana, is begging for other follow-ups of this, and so enthralled with this. And indeed, each moment has been a special gift. So we will continue to appreciate that.
We have one more next week. Yeah.
Yes, this is not our final one. Yes. So I will just sort of read this one here. We'll start with this one. Oh, okay. Now, the person who wrote it, I may have a little, but it says on page 40, you write about the silence of the blank. And so page, let's just help our reading audience here. Page 140 is in the unit dealing with life. So the silence of the blank Is there any, I'm having trouble reading this. Is there any, who wrote that? Oh, is there any value in that? I'm sorry. Is there any value in trust or that silence? Is there any value in that silence? Okay. Maybe we can find where that was.
It's, well, yeah, on page 140, there's a discussion of, the deep silence, the kol de mamad daka, the thin voice of silence revealed to the prophet Elijah, and an imposed silence that defines nihilism, the silence of a blank. Right.
So the silence of the blank would be the imposed silence, the nihilism.
Yes,
Mhm.
silence is like fire, so to say.
I see.
It
Okay.
can enhance or destroy. The silence that is a blank, the silence of emptiness, of meaninglessness. It's a silence that creeps over us in our isolation. It's the silence that is part of torture, where no one can hear you scream and you hear nothing. It's the silence of a radical isolation, being adrift in a sea of a radical indifference. It's a silence that eclipses relation. Relation opens up a profound silence, the silence of depth, the silence that surpasses utterance. Think of the silence between you and your beloved. Think of the silence that out of which a poem emerges. Think of Elijah. After a hard day dealing with the idolaters, he asked God, show me something, show me a sign. God, there was thunder. God wasn't in the thunder. There was fire. God wasn't in the fire, lightning. But where does God appear? God was in what's mistranslated as a still small voice, but it's kol de mamad daka. It's the thin voice of silence, of what surpasses utterance, the ineffable. The blank silence is the opposite of the ineffable. The ineffable is what instills words with meaning. We're taught, we have a tradition. It's from the Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidism, but I'm sure he has it from elsewhere. He says, in every word, there's an aleph. Actually, the Kabbalists deal with this too. Do you know about gematria, meaning derived from numerical values of words? Sometimes they'll add one more for the aleph that's in the word. Aleph is silent. This is extraordinary, that an alphabet should have a letter that has no sound. No sound. It's the silence that precedes the creation. The bait, the first letter that has a sound, is the first letter in Torah. Life is about collisions between silences.
Wonderful. Very profound. Thank you. Very, very profound. Implying basically, as you said, there are two different kinds of silences, and we have to sort of distinguish between the two. So we have two wonderful questions here. The first one also is a hint towards basically what's coming next week, because we will talk about the word forgiveness next week. But this ties them together through the discussion of memory. The question is, would you kindly teach us how to forgive through remembering and memory? And they thank you in advance.
Well, we'll talk about forgiveness next week, but forgiveness, what do you remember when you remember? I mean, memory is about memory of what matters, what is holy, what there is to love. Okay? It's not about holding a grudge. It's not about holding a grudge. Why do we forgive? What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is the restoration of a relationship in the light of remembering what matters. I mean, think of the parent who, God forbid, says Kaddish on his or her child for going astray somehow. Marrying a non-Jew, God forbid. You're going to say Kaddish? Kaddish is about memory. But you're saying Kaddish to forget. Don't let your what has hurt you cloud you to what there is to love, and therefore to the matter of forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean forgetfulness, but it does. Forgiveness is. I'll go more deeply into this next week. It is about the restoration, the healing of a relationship. First of all, it's all about relationship.
Very good. And then this is a nice and classic question posed in these terms. If life has already chosen us and our mission has already been chosen for us, how do we then grapple with free will?
Oh, easy. Free will is, you remember the TV show Mission Impossible? Your mission, if you choose to accept it, is that's where the free will comes in. Will we accept the mission? Will we decide what to do in the light of having been chosen for a mission, for a task, for a destiny that's placed in our hands? Fate is the opposite of destiny. Fate is neutral. Oedipus, there's no meaning in his fate. He's locked into it. He has no decisions to make. He has no free will. Moses, who is destined to bring the Israelites out of Egypt, tries to talk God out of it. You got the wrong guy. Please don't do this. Don't send me. And finally, it's, oh, all right. I'll do it. So he's summoned. Oedipus is not summoned to anything. The free will comes in the decision to say, here I am. There's no saying here I am by Oedipus. Fate doesn't care whether you're here or not. You're a cog in some wheel, right?
Okay. Does the soul have memory?
Yes.
That's what's definitely
yes. Okay.
shared in
Next
your
question.
yes. Okay, good.
Yes. Look, you can see, I've seen this in my small grandchildren, as if they have a memory of some Torah or teaching they were given, connection that they have, a joy that they have. The soul has memory. Yes. Sometimes memory slips away. Sometimes we grow old and our memory slips away. But the soul doesn't slip away. It's somewhere in the soul. It's somewhere in the soul. This is why we're taught in the Talmud that we have to stand in the presence of a scholar, a sage, even one who has lost his learning, has forgotten it, because it's somewhere in his soul. And the Israelites took the broken tablets into the land as well as the whole tablets. It's the memory is in there.
And of course, I think there was some point in your book, I remember reading it in your book, or certainly others as well, the mystical notion that when the child is born, right before the moment of birth, that the angel comes and touches the child right here Every human being, right? Every human being has this area. There is a scientific name for it. I don't know what it is. A doctor here probably might know, but basically it's basically the connection point in the embryo of formation of the connection of to the palate and whatnot. And the angel touches the person here, and before that they are aware of the presence of God and infinite, a tremendous amount of knowledge that was from that other dimension, and then it's consciously maybe forgotten. Sometimes little children remember a lot of it, but it's there, and that ties together with that as well. But that knowledge is inside our souls. So we'll move to the next question here. If you do not choose, I'm just going to read it as is. If you do not choose life per your definition, what happens to that individual, his soul?
What happens? I don't know. What are the consequences? It's not so much what happens to me if I don't choose life. It's what happens to the lives around me if I don't choose life. It's not about me. Choosing life is not about me. It's choosing to save a life. Each of us is created to save at least one life. To choose life is to choose to save a life. If I don't choose life, then it's not at the expense of my life, it's somebody else's life that's at stake.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, this next question is regarding memory, as described on page 116. That a patient of mine who survived the Holocaust said by remembering those who passed away, that kept them alive, and he lost most of his family. So there are 3 questions following from that. Can memory also be damaging when a person dwells too much on memory and less on the present? Can mitzvot displace the pain? I think I'll read all 3 questions here regarding this, and then I'll hand you the card. Can mitzvot displace the pain? So the question is, regarding that, how damaging can that be in the process of trying to evoke those memories? Second is, how did experts on the Holocaust find the thousands of survivors in general? How do they help them, I think is what he's trying to say, deal with the horrors? And then how many generations remember? I'll hand you the card there so you can guide it with that.
Okay. Yes. Keeping them alive. Look, what do the words Yad Vashem mean? A remembrance and a name. When we keep those who have passed alive through a memory of their name. We invoke their names for healing. We invoke their names in Yisker services, right? There are names we won't utter that we should be erased, because to speak the name is to stir the soul. The soul is made of the name. The soul is connected to our soul, to our name, to our memory. Okay, so it's not just that remembering them keeps them alive. And you might want to say, well, they're not alive, they're dead. Don't you get it? That's the problem. They're not alive. They're not sitting here. But there is a connection to the soul. Memory is a connection. And doing mitzvot, the word mitzvah means connection. It doesn't mean an order that you follow or a command that you obey. It's a tzavta, connection. It's a healing connection. Memory is healing for the ones we remember, as well as for ourselves. About dealing with the horrors, there are specialties in psychology and psychoanalysis that deal with the horrors. I know there are specialists who work with people who have nightmares, just the nightmares. I knew a psychologist who was since passed in Israel, whose entire clientele consisted of children of survivors. Children who had the memories of their parents, even when the parents never spoke about it. Okay? The memories are inherited through the soul, through the connection of the soul. And the mitzvot are ways of connecting. We do. How do we, what are one of the ways in which we bring healing to one who is, God forbid, sick? By giving tzedakah in the name of the one who is sick. Making that connection. It's about, memory is about connections. Mitzvot are about connections. Dealing with the horrors is about reconnecting with life somehow. But I mean, I would never presume to say to a Holocaust survivor, this is what you got to do. They have to do what they have to do.
All right. Thank you so much. So this sort of actually relates to what you just said. They're concerning the question on the soul here, and they're quoting part of an essence of the book here. This is from page, the area of 125, page 125. The soul is the speech act of the Holy One, which we make of our soul, and that lies in whether we join our speech, thought, and deeds into modes of prayer or through performance of mitzvot. That was sort of their summary of that section of the page there. And then the question is, the word mitzvot runs as a thread through many of the words. Was that intended, or is it a vital part of the soul? Like as we think of Ner Hashem.
Yes. Yeah. The mitzvah is the lamp. The Torah is the light. It's one of our teachings, right? Yes. I mean, one of the things that makes these words life-sustaining is the light that's in each of them. I suggested at one of our sessions that these aren't exactly synonyms for each other, these words, but they form a network. Each is connected to the other. And so you'll find, words recurring, themes recurring in different parts of the book, like mitzvah, like responsibility, like relationship. You can't just take a word out of the language and just deal with the word. Every word is connected to every other word in the language. And that's sort of the nature of it. And mitzvah means, as I said, means connection. Mitzvah is at the nexus of this. One more?
Yes, this will be our final one here. And actually has the 3 parts here. What would you expect from good Jewish students? Do Jews view life as we live it by creating heaven and hell on earth for ourselves, rather than depending on a life hereafter? That's the first part of the question. Yes.
Should I do
I'll
that?
give you. Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah. It's Elie Wiesel once said, God created, it's through the word that God created the world, and it's through the words that we are destroying it. It's in our hands to make this realm into a heaven or a hell. Jews do not labor to get into God's kingdom. We labor to get God into this kingdom. You don't hear those rabbis, well, some of you, I don't know how many of you have been to churches and heard church sermons, but fairly regularly, in my experience, pastors in churches will talk about your reward after you die or your punishment. Rabbis don't talk about, have you noticed? Rabbis don't talk about that. That's God's affair. We have enough to deal with right here. And our task is to make this realm into a Gan Eden, a Garden of Eden. And this is worth one more word. There's a scene near the end of Field of Dreams. If you've seen it, where Ray, who has built the baseball field, and the dead players come and play, and the last one he sees is his father, his dead father, his young father. And he goes up to Ray, and he's loving playing baseball. He says, "Is this heaven?" And Ray says, "No, this is Iowa." He says, "Man, I could have sworn this was heaven." Then Ray looks up. He sees his wife and his child on the porch swing. And he says, "Maybe this is heaven. Maybe this is heaven. It's right here in our midst. It's very nigh unto us to do it, to realize it. This instant."
And that last sentence, of course, is a statement from the Torah itself. The mitzvot
Yeah.
it's not far away in the heavens. It's not on the earth below. It's very close to what we can do. And that's very special. As a matter of fact, I would just, the only thing that the thought before that was regarding what we could call our mission statement as Jews. In one sentence, someone asks, what's the mission statement? Every organization, every people should have a mission statement. What's our mission statement? It's very easy. One sentence from the second paragraph of the Aleinu that we say at the end of every service. L'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai. To bring God's kingdom, a better aspect of God's presence into this world.
Right. Yeah.
So, and it ties together here. Is that why mitzvot are so important, that as we live for the living?
Yes. I mean, l'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai. This, may we mend, heal this world so that the kingdom of God can be realized. Mitzvot, as I said, it's not just connection, it's healing. It's healing a wound. Creation is wounded. The process of creation, this is very Kabbalistic, is a process of wounding. The klipot, light gets hidden in shells. We are given the commandments as a means of healing, of tikkun, healing this world, making this into a dwelling place for the Holy One. The letter Beit means home, house, dwelling place. First letter in the Torah reveals to us the meaning of the whole Torah, which is to make this realm into a dwelling place for Hashem by enabling one another to dwell.
And the last one sort of just brings things to a sort of a very concrete example. It simply asks here, is that why Jews bury the dead a day after death?
The Jews bury the dead a day after death because the Jews don't embalm the dead. The Jews traditionally don't prolong the process of the return of ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It's part of how God created the body and the earth and our material physical reality. We are made of, the Adam is made of Adamah, right? The human is made of the earth. So when we pass, we don't act like we can delay this return to the earth, as no matter how we may try, right? I mean, embalming, anyone ever see Lenin?
I was just
Red
thinking,
Square.
One of our congregants just told me about Lenin the other day. To this day, Joseph, you were standing there. Well, actually, Arkady was sitting there next to Leo in our congregation, and he was saying this, that Lenin was embalmed, and must have been a pretty powerful kind of embalming, because he lies in a monument. I was told that he lies in a sarcophagus kind of situation, but with the face that's still visible to the public to this day. And I was told, again, this is just what I was told, but this person, had knowledge of this, that people on a daily basis go by to pay their respects to Lenin every day on a daily basis, and to look at his face and the body. One of our members
Well-
said, we don't know how many cosmetic surgeries was done post-mortem. We'll stay out of that one. I don't know. But
Thank you.
sure.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you all.
you. Thank you. This has been a wonderful session again. And we want to thank all of you in our listening audience and on Zoom.